Welcome back. We now have an important roundtable discussion with some of the leading players in cruise retail. So please join me in welcoming back Lisa Bauer, President and CEO of Starboard, for a panel discussion with fellow cruise retailer representatives, Dufry Cruise Services Retail Operations Director Adrian and Harding Retail Managing Director James Prescott. The format of this panel discussion is in two parts. Our trio of experts will first debate and discuss measures to reignite the cruise retail sector. We'll take a very brief 2-minute break in between before moving on to a discussion into the future of cruise retail. And so we've already heard from you, Lisa, so I'll let James and Adrian say hello and introduce themselves to our viewers before cracking in with our discussion. But as you can see, all our speaker bios can be viewed on the page below the screen.
Yeah, very pleased to be part of the panel, and I think a slightly interesting and different take today versus, the last couple of discussions. So I'm really looking forward to having a good and solid discussion on the topics.
Great, thank you. So we'll be focusing on the cruise retail business in this first half. And I think the first question to ask you all as we come to an end of what has been a difficult year, to state the obvious, is what the current mood is amongst yourselves, your respective companies, and, in the day-to-day business and from the partners you work with. So perhaps, Lisa, if you'd like to go first.
Yeah, so, no shock to anybody that it's been an incredibly difficult year for us all, for us as retailers, for the cruise lines and all of that. But I will say it is such a resilient industry. And from my perspective, it has only deepened partnerships because none of this was anybody's fault. It's not like the retailers didn't perform or the cruise lines didn't bring the guests. It was something, quite frankly, that was out of all of our control. And I think that has enabled the partnerships, whether it's with our retail brand partners or whether it's with our cruise line partners, and the level of cooperation, the level of, again, I can't emphasize the partnership word, moving from a vendor to a partner, and it's really accelerated that. And I also think, and I'm sure my colleagues would echo this as well, that we've all used this time during the pause to figure out how we are in fact stronger on the other side of it. How do we execute on all the great research that we just heard about, and how are we ready for the customers? Certainly safety is the number one priority, but what are those new experiences that we're going to add? What are those limited time things that surprise and delight? How are we bringing the destination to life in a more powerful way? How are we just being more efficient? All of us have had to look at every penny we spend, at least I know we have. And, how do we make every dollar we spend work harder? So I honestly think that while it has been a horrific situation for our industry, it has also provided a platform for us to rethink what's possible and how we do it in a more efficient way. And also, how do we just rethink what's possible?
Great. Thank you, Lisa. And then James, what is the current mood in your business? Obviously, in terms of keeping stability in the cruise retail business at this time, obviously the positives for your company is the very huge investment by Davidson Kempner. So what is the current mood at Harding Retail and with your partners and amongst and yourself as well?
Yeah, thank you, Capilla. I think the first, if I may, just picking up from some of the points Peter was saying there, I think the point about cruise, and it would be fascinating if it were possible to have a live kind of vote in of how many people on the call today have been on a ship before, but it is amazing often how few people have been on a ship. And I think it's easy to do the comparison to airports all the time. And Peter, you made a lot of references about the quality of the people and the frequency and those kind of things. I just encourage everyone, when you're thinking about ships, not to think about airports at all, because I think although there probably are a number of people on the call today who've never been on a ship before, I doubt there's anyone on the call today who's never been on holiday before. And unless I'm missing it, there's no reason you'd go on a cruise ship unless you're on holiday. So I'd think more about your holiday experiences, your week or 2 weeks in Mykonos or wherever it is you're going to go. What's your total experience when you're there? And I think if you put that mindset on, it's a very different proposition. So, yeah, I mean, as Lisa said, times are challenging at the moment. I I like to think we're through the worst of this, that the two vaccines have given some real confidence. The CDC requirements for getting back to cruise are very challenging, I guess, necessarily that you would expect them to be that. But the reality is nobody really knows how long this is going to take. And no matter what anybody tells you, from all the conversations we've had with all of the cruise industry people over the last few weeks, things continue to change. And even today, when we're on this call, an email pinged in the background to say that Carnival have extended for January, the pause. So it is a continually a moving thing. The one thing we do know is there is another side of this, and all of the intel we get and see for 2022 is it's an incredibly positive, buoyant outlook. There are 50 plus brand new ships that will be in the market by that point, and 117 ships, still under construction. So the market on the other side is incredibly good, and the positivity about cruise, none of that is diminished. This is about the time between today, when we're almost not trading at all, and the future. But we should get some real positives, I think, and optimism from the vaccines, because there is in that a positive mindset to be had, that the end is more visible than it has been at any point in the last 7 or 8 months. So this is about how we manage that transition. And although we've talked a lot about how do we keep the revenue up and what other initiatives do we do, the reality of that interim period from a retail perspective, actually we should be quite also optimistic about it, that we're going to have shorter cruises which tend to yield higher revenue. There'll be more adults and fewer children. There's a lot of onboard credit has been used. The cruises to nowhere mean that you don't have so much port competition. So there are a lot of reasons why lower occupancy doesn't necessarily mean lower gross revenue, and all the numbers that have been shared by any of my kind of colleagues here or previous speakers, all the numbers quoted are between kind of plus 20 and plus 50% gross revenue. So there is a lot to be optimistic about. There is still a lot of uncertainty, but the end at least is more visible than it ever has been before. So yeah, we stay upbeat and optimistic that the future is worth fighting for. And as Lisa said, the partnerships have got stronger and stronger and stronger through this period, and as long as we can keep some of that into the future, there's a lot to be optimistic about.
Okay. And Adrian, what is the current mood at Dufry, obviously the world's biggest travel retailer? We've heard Julian Diaz recently speaking at the ACI summit. Do we have Adrian on the line? We don't have. Okay, apologies. Adrian Riches from Dufry is dialing in as soon as possible. We're experiencing some technical difficulties because of the connection, but we'll have him back soon, I'm sure. But in the meantime, we have Lisa and James, and they'll discuss the next few questions with us. And I guess one of the key things that we've mentioned in the past is data sharing. That's been one of the challenges of the travel retail sector, and there's never been greater need for such. And I wanted to find out from both of you that is the cruise sector more collaborative than you might find in other sectors in travel retail? I know, James, that you said it's not a good idea to compare airports and cruise sectors very similarly, and it's a very different beast altogether. But what sort of information are you getting, James, from your partners on the type of guests that will be back on board? We've heard from Lisa on the types of loyal cruisers and so on, but you're obviously working with very different partners, such as Virgin, who are a completely different style of cruise that we haven't even seen before.
Yeah, and I think Lisa touched on a few of the points I thought, very well earlier, talking about it's a data rich channel. And interestingly, Lisa, segmenting into the types of cruise lines. There is a richness of data that exists in cruise that I think is unparalleled for any kind of retail environment that you could bolt onto it. It doesn't exist in an airport, on a high street, in a holiday destination. The cruise lines know who those guests are. Have they traveled before? We know by cabin, how frequently they're visiting the store, who's in the cabin. If you can marry that in a GDPR compliant way with the cruise line data that says, well, there are 2 adults aged in this bracket in cabin number 53 who are prior cruisers who always buy a watch, will target them with a special VIP invitation to a watch event, and some really specific, detailed, fine-tuned marketing. It's something that the brands and a retailer could really only dream of in any other environment. And it's fascinating how much even some of our partners who were, less keen, less forthcoming to share that level of data are now universally incredibly keen, because everybody is looking at gross revenue. I think the number that, or the metric that all of us in retail will be used to looking at is either spend per head, spend per passenger, PPD, PPPD, etc. Whichever way you cut it, what's on average, how much do people spend? That almost becomes an irrelevant measure in the future. It's about, well, you've got X number of passengers, how do you optimize and maximize the amount of gross revenue you can get from them? So whether it's limited time experiences, as Lisa refers to them, or pop-ups or trunk shows or different events, I think the partners who understand cruise retail and understand how to really leverage the richness of data are the ones that will win out of this. And we have, I would say, certainly the first time in my own experience, we have a universal kind of open book, if you like, approach from all of the partners to want to share that data so that we can optimize together. Marry that with the brands, ourselves as the conduit, and the cruise operators with the historic information, and it's nirvana from a kind of retail and marketing targeting perspective.
Great. And Lisa, how are your relationships with your cruise line partners in terms of data sharing? And you've obviously already mentioned some of the trends that you're seeing with the cruise passengers that will be coming on board. But how can you use that information? And is there more coming that really is changing the landscape?
Yeah, I mean, I think James said it really well in terms of the level and the willingness of sharing is really unprecedented. And at Starboard, we have invested heavily in a business intelligence group and really setting up the infrastructure, because one of the challenges is, the cruise lines did have all this great rich data, but you have to be in a position as a company to synthesize it and digest it, and then figure out, as James said, how do we also get the same level of rich data from, all of our brand partners that are all over the world of, what are you seeing on land that we can learn from and test at sea? And how do you marry up that data with the cruise line data? But I also think it's just about taking a step back and really trying to figure out, looking at the data the way we haven't before around, where are people spending by day of week, by time of day, what can you try that could drive purchase at a time where previously it wasn't done before. So that transparency in the data that we're getting from the cruise lines is very, very important. But we also want to figure out how much additional data we can get from many of the folks on the call, and figure out how and if that could also apply on board. So I have this saying that my team makes fun of me about: the one with the best data wins, but you've got to use that data to be smarter and try different things, and not everything you try is going to work. But if you have data at the heart of what you're doing, I think we'll all be better on the other side of this.
Okay. From some previous conversations that I've had with some of you, there have been some interesting ideas in how the cruise sector will evolve, or even return to a different type of service or model that focuses on high ticket spend versus, I guess, more of the mass products and so on. Could you tell us more about that? And do you agree or disagree? Lisa, perhaps?
It's just like they're loyal to the cruise lines, that they're loyal to brands. So I do think that the customer that is either going to self-gift, or every time they cruise, they get a particular memento of the cruise, and whether they're a watch collector or something, I think that's going to stay true. Really, where we see the opportunity is bringing this newness and giving, really, as Peter was saying, how do we do a better job bringing exclusives to cruise retail? so that it doesn't become about price because the customer can't get it anywhere else? How does it drive demand because it's only there for a limited time? And how is it such a specific memory of that particular cruise? So I think exclusives is a huge opportunity. I also think destination and this whole idea of authenticity in the destination, about, whether it's an artisanal luxury good or it's, a souvenir. We've talked about this for years, and I wouldn't give us a good grade overall as an industry, but it's certainly a huge opportunity. So to me, it's less about a shift than it is building the pie overall, if that makes sense. So we're going to have those trusted brands. I think brands that are doing a good job storytelling are going to be able to grow their footprint. And how do we do a good job through our sales associates bringing that to life? I also wouldn't underestimate the impact of brands that have a good sustainable story from sustainability and how important that is. I just read a survey the other day, or actually I heard about it yesterday on a Moët Hennessy call, that 56% of consumers are worried about the carbon footprint that they contribute to when they go on holiday through their flight. So how does the cruise industry do a good job talking about that? So there's so much more beyond if watches and jewelry are down, do we have to sell a lot more smaller product? I don't think that's the answer. I think it's what is that new breadth of product that we can build off of a really solid foundation that we have already. That'd be my perspective.
Absolutely. Okay. And James, what's your perspective on how the model within the store will change in terms of how you're selling to cruise guests and what they're looking for?
Yeah, I think Virgin is an interesting. You brought up Virgin earlier. Their retail on that ship, because we were involved in collaboration for the 3 years leading up to the launch. Retail on that ship is not seen as a physical shop in a space. It's a fundamental and integral part of the whole experience. And again, I come back to my opening example of picture yourself on holiday somewhere for a week or two. In Mykonos was the last holiday, hence the reference. But picture yourself in Mykonos. You arrive, you're trying to get your bearings. You want some sun cream, and it's a bit chillier than you thought. You want to buy a jumper, etc., etc. But as the week progresses during the day, you'll be, in the morning looking for souvenirs, in the evening and pre or post dinner looking for jewelry or watch or treating. So this is not like a person going through an airport or the high street on a Saturday afternoon. This is a person that you've got for anything from 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 10, 14 plus days, and as Lisa said, in a particular location. So the opportunities you got to sell to people are everything from extreme convenience to gift to self-treat. And it's interesting that research calls out buying for yourself as the high thing. That's probably not surprising, because over a 2-week holiday, you're probably most of the time buying stuff for yourself, and then you buy a few gifts. But I think if you look at the opportunity over the entire week or two experience, and if ever you're thinking about cruise, particularly for brand partners watching, and particularly those who haven't been on a ship before, just picture yourself on holiday, and what is it that would engage you? Is it a tasting in the local bar? That would be pretty exciting, or buying something that had an artisan element to it, or something that was uniquely local, or an international brand that was at a good price, or an availability of something new. All of those things appeal, and the physical part is fundamentally important. And again, Peter referred to the people do well. I'd refer back to your holiday. On holiday, are you going to go back to the shop, the local one on the corner with the person who gave you amazing service and gave you something you didn't expect, or the grumpy swine, down the other end of the street? Well, you're only going to go back to that shop. So staff have to be better. They build a rapport and a relationship. So longer cruises tend to buy, more premium priced products. Put all that together with unique research and an ability through digital, whether it's app or website, to pre-engage with people, and you do have that complete end-to-end experience that you just don't get anywhere else. So I think we as an industry have been good at some parts of that, and some ships, cruise lines are better than others, but I don't think there's anywhere yet that holistically has done the whole thing. And that's the challenge for us on Restart, to make sure that every ship is A to Z.
Okay. You spoke about the sales staff, and one of the pertinent questions coming from our audience from a supplier perspective is, how you are currently navigating the challenges around staffing on board, crew engagement, and getting, the retail people to, of course, represent yourselves, but also the brands on board to a level that they should. How is that working out for you at the moment for Starboard, Lisa?
That has been probably one of the most complex issues that we've had to deal with. First, it was the repatriation of the crew with the shutdowns and when borders were closed and you weren't allowed to use public transportation. And, that was definitely a challenge, getting people home. Our sales associates that are home right now, we're trying to stay in contact. We're doing town halls with them. Each of our district managers and our shoreside leaders are staying in constant contact with our people. And of course, their number one request is, when can I get back to sea? Which is fantastic. We've done surveys with them in terms of, what their concerns are. So we're making sure that we're addressing that. And of course, they have lots of questions around all the new protocols that they'll be required to do. So I think my short answer to that is we're trying to stay engaged with them to the degree we can while they're not on board. We've invested heavily in a talent LMS system, a learning management system. And so there are opportunities, even while they're not on board, for us to start sharing new protocols and things like that. But, I continue to believe that, and I don't think James or Adrian or anybody would disagree, that the crews on board the ships are the secret sauce. And, not only do they develop relationships with customers on board a particular cruise, but a lot of times those loyal customers that come back again and again, they ask for that same sales associate, or they work with that same sales associate over a period of years. And so I think to the degree that we spend the most amount of time out of anything we're spending time on figuring out how do we set our crews up for success in this post-COVID environment is going to be the best, because they're the ones that engage with the guests. They're the ones that tell us what the customers, how are they responding to something, or what are we not offering that the guests are looking for. So, I think first and foremost, we have to look out for their safety. I didn't really address the complexity, but, as we start to bring crews back, we've not had an issue with crew wanting to come back. The challenges have been, how do you get the right nationality that aren't restricted because of certain, regulatory challenges? And we're just going to have to work our way through that, because it's very different than it used to be, where, we have 56 different nationalities across our 8 brands. And it's just going to have to be much more prescriptive in terms of which nationalities are allowed to be in which countries, and what the restrictions are, and who can travel what border. So, I'm thanking our human resources teams in advance and our crew schedulers for trying to navigate it. But it's certainly going to be a new world. But thus far, for the very few that we have brought back, we've managed to do it so far.
Brilliant. And James, maybe from a different perspective, you could tell us how closely you're working with your supplier partners in navigating the circumstances at the moment. Obviously, around the sales staff that are representing these brands, but also generally in terms of the assortment and getting the product on board and working together.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough time for everybody, isn't it? There's often you hear people, squealing about the landlords, or, the airports, or the crew. The reality is everyone into this business model, sort of on a certain set of parameters, and, brands are hurting as much as retailers or, cruise partners, etc. So it is tough for them. I'd say with probably 4 or 5 exceptions, and I'll name and shame later if you push me hard enough, but with 4 or 5 exceptions, we've had the most incredibly open, collaborative, and, kind of generosity of support, both kind of, emotionally and in terms of intent for restart, that you could possibly hope for. I think COVID-19 has, I know it's been said to exhaustion, but has really brought people together. The challenge is going to be on restart. Adrian from MSC, sorry, I was got confused there with Adrian Ritchie's, talked before about the amount of aging inventory that's out there on the ships, a lot of ships that are inaccessible. So how we operate at the beginning to clear that aging inventory to buy new is going to be a critical part of it. What we do with ranging, where are those ships going to be? How appropriate is the merchandise? So now more than ever, we do need to work really closely together. The people part of it, we tend not to have brand people on the ships. We have our own people, but I just echo, and I won't repeat any of what Lisa said. Absolutely, it is the secret ingredient, I think, to why cruise is such a memorable experience. It's the people across the entire ship, not just retail.
You mentioned the challenges with inventory and so on, and we've seen in the wider travel retail landscape a lot of different alternative channels that people are moving into. Duty paid, for example. Some of the ferry lines are building pop-up shops. Retailers taking leases for temporary downtown stores and so on. In the short term, are there any alternative measures that the cruise retail sector is taking, or are you focusing your efforts on a return to cruising per se? And maybe that's a question for Lisa to start off, and then perhaps James.
I'll be honest and say we certainly have looked at those options, because unlike our colleagues, even within our other LVMH brands, that they have the keys to the store, and if they decide to open the store, they can walk up with their keys and open it. We're not in that same position. We're 100% dependent upon the restart with our cruise line partners. But because we are a duty-free business, the tax implications of some of these things that we are doing are very complex. And candidly, I would just say that we actually are focusing our efforts on the cruise restart and on the cruise industry and what we can do there. So, while there may be opportunities in the future to think differently, right now, I think that we are just so passionate about the cruise industry that that's where we are spending our time.
Okay. And James, is this something that you've considered at Harding?
Yeah, I'd agree with, again, almost everything Lisa said there. I think the reality for us is a lot of the merchandise is physically on ships, which are moored offshore in various places, and there's a lot of cruise specific merchandise. I just go back to my earlier point that this is an interim temporary situation. Use the downtime to make sure, if you were starting from scratch on each of those ships as they come back, if you were starting from scratch, is that the merchandise? Are those the brands? Are those the promotions? Are those the people? So 90% of our time and energy has been into making sure when we do restart, we're not sort of crawling back to life, that we start full speed from day one. And if we've got 50% of the passengers, why can we not generate 100% of the original revenue from half the passengers, because we execute everything, brilliantly. I think in the middle of this, to sort of run off and start doing, can we do a little bit of this? We just haven't done any of those things. It's, we don't see a big opportunity for doing things like that. Optimizing when we come back through pre-order, as Peter said, delivery to the ships, post-cruise awareness, and really engaging that wider end-to-end. I think there's a much bigger, short to mid-term prize than any of those others, for us certainly.
Welcome back. We are now back to our panel discussion, where we'll be moving our discussion to the future of cruise retail and the possibilities for the industry once trading can resume to some normality. We didn't get a chance to say hello to Adrian Riches of Dufry earlier, so I'd just like to give him a quick opportunity to introduce himself.
Hi, yes, I'm sorry about the connectivity, and just quickly want to respond to, I did hear James's comment, so where he said that I had mentioned that Harding was the best, actually one of the best. I think there's three of us. Yeah, so I've been with Dufry now since 2013. And I'm very pleased now to be able to join the conversation and continue. I'm glad you can all hear me now.
Great, thank you. Great to have you back, Adrian. So before we went on the break, James mentioned wanting to ask the audience a question on how many people have been on a cruise. So we had a quick impromptu poll on our website, and the results are in, and we have had 69% have been on a cruise ship, 21% have not, and 10% plan to, and that is from our audience of about 460 odd people. James, do you have any comments on that, or any suggestions or recommendations on how to do business with a cruise line if they haven't been on a cruise ship before?
Yeah, I mean, apart from the obvious, go on a cruise, because they are great, and they really are. There is something for everybody. Lisa touched on the big truck, but there really is something for everybody. I defy somebody to say it's not for me. I think they haven't kind of seen what's out there. If you haven't been on a cruise ship, though, just have a think. When you've been on holiday for that 2-week period, imagine yourself for that entire experience rather than the half an hour when you're nipping through an airport. I think because there won't be anybody on the call who's never been through an airport or who's never been on holiday. I'd say that will be a fairly confident 100%. So if you think with that mindset rather than an airport and I've got 5 minutes to capture people, I think then things will be a bit better for our proposition.
Brilliant. Okay. I just want to remind the audience that the Slido app is up and running, and if you'd like to ask our panelists any questions, please do so. Please take the opportunity, and I'm sure they'd be delighted to answer your questions. Before we move on to the questions, I just want to give Adrian another opportunity to just kind of recap what we discussed earlier, and just to give your view on the current mood at Dufry in terms of the current situation for the cruise business, and how you're currently working with suppliers. Obviously, there's been some restructuring at Dufry and so on, and what your sort of priorities are for the cruise retail sector at the moment.
Okay, so actually I was able to hear everybody, so without reiterating, a lot of what's been said is kind of what we've been working on and how we feel here. The sentiment and the feeling here at Cruise Services is we're very excited about the restart. We were in a very fast pace of growth, and although nobody wanted this pause in business, this has actually given us an opportunity to stop for a moment and reflect on what were we doing before, how do we now have to operate moving forward, and then how does that kind of transform what we do in the future, which I believe we're going to talk about now. We're very excited. We've kind of coined our phrase here, sailing back to success, which is something that we've kind of internally are focused on reviewing everything, reviewing assortments, store layouts. Obviously, the number one priority that everybody's mentioned is the safety of our team members, the rest of the crew, and of course the guests on board. Also then by cruise line, how we operate. So the big focus for us going forward is going to be retail operations and marketing. How do we speak to the guest in the new way of working? And how do we make sure that we operate and execute correctly according to the protocols? And as everyone's already touched on, if you have the right team on board that's engaged and connect with the guests, then you stand a much better chance of being very, very successful. In terms of the future, the cruise channel is something that is important to Dufry Group. We had significant growth. We're now in this pause phase. We look forward to sailing back to success and continued growth within the channel for Dufry.
Great. Thank you, Adrian, for that quick recap. So looking at the future of cruise retail, I guess we could start with so many changes going now, creating safe shopping environments for guests and managing relationships with the cruise trinity, through the crisis and beyond. How do you see the future of cruise retail looking? Lisa, I guess let's start with you.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about the safety protocols and the great relationships with our cruise partners. I think, from my perspective, and in particular with our retail partners, my big thing is to just push us. And what do I mean by that? Like, when you look around what's going on in the world, the pace of change and the acceleration is unlike anything we've ever seen. The example I would give is, I don't know if any of you have seen this statistic, but it took Disney 7 months to get the same amount of viewers that it took Netflix to get 10 years to get. And so it's not just our industry. Everywhere we look, the innovation, I mean, look how fast the vaccine that is coming, right? And so for all the retailers that are on the call, I'm saying push us. Stop thinking about cruise as its own little bubble and start to think about all those amazing things that you're doing with your brands, with social media, with marketing, with key influencers, with testing, with experiences. And, you know, cruise ships were defined by the amount of space we have, but should we be defined by that? So, you know, for me, I'm all about what can be possible and how do we put things on ships that historically look great in a huge footprint that you can do in an airport or you can do in one of our incredible DFS stores as, you know, as a pop-up. But how do we reimagine retail at sea and figure out a way to take things that you are doing an incredible job with your brand holistically and figure out how do we bring that to life on board? That's my push us on that, and let's figure out in partnership how.
Okay, no worries. We can, yeah, you're back now. But that's, I think you've just concluded there anyway. I'll move. Same
I
question
think she was
for
going
you,
to say Harding
Adrian.
are the best. So, no, maybe the end.
I think Adrian put it well. One of the top three. James, do you want to take that question on and give us some of your thoughts on what the future of cruise retail looks like for you?
Yeah, I think there's a short, medium, and long. Where she said the short is everybody to get back to life, full speed, sort the inventory out, because you know those ships do physically at the moment have arguably a lot of the wrong merchandise. So we've got a really quick job to put all those plans into place. Midterm, all of it, because I mean all of us are consumers, and how we interact in shops at the moment, that's not going to disappear overnight. People are going to be wary of fully, you know, physically engaging for the near term. But then there's long term, where all of the original plans for making a retail on cruise a much more immersive experience, like the way that Virgin had set out to do, that's what we were aspiring to do, you know, in a much wider level. All of that still exists. It's just I made almost the same point a few questions ago, but it's the gap between now and then. And to Lisa's point, it's fast tracking all the things that were being thought about and dreamt about. It's fast tracking them all now. And if we all look at 2021 as an incredible opportunity for research, development, trialing, testing, not being afraid to fail, everybody is more open-minded than ever before. It's what Adrian and Lisa had both said, and I hate saying that sort of reference to what they said, but it's, you know, I wholeheartedly agree. Using all of those opportunities to fast track all the ideas, we're pushing against open doors with everybody. So any personal brand with an idea or a different way to do things, we were always open-minded. We prided ourselves on being kind of innovative and fleet of foot, but that's just accelerated, you know, X-fold over the last few months. So.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Adrian, and your views on the future of cruise retail?
Yeah, I kind of echo exactly what James said. It's like right now the focus is to just get up and running and make sure that we hit the ground running. I believe that some of the things that we've been forced to change because we're going to have to work differently in regards to assortment. And fortunately for us, we've been able to remove about 80% of our merchandise from all of our ships because our goal is to start clean and fresh with the right assortments on the right vessels. But the way we operate, the way that we're going to focus now on more luxury, more one-on-one interaction with less guests. We know we're going to have less guests, and our focus is to increase the spend per passenger with less people. But we're going to have the time to do that. We're going to have the time to do it with those things that Lisa touched on, which is the guest experience, brand immersion. And for example, on Carnival, where we were very focused, and each cruise line is very different for us, on these big crowd gathering massive events, that's just not going to happen anymore. But I believe that the actions that we're going to put into place, focusing on higher ticket with the brand immersion, getting the brands involved, is going to help us drive more spend. And we're probably going to look back and say, hey, why were we so focused on doing those things for so long, when actually a combination of integrating those things within the store assortment and focusing actually in a different direction, I think that's going to really kind of carve out the future of not just what we offer, but how we execute and how we connect with the guest.
Mm-hmm. So are you expecting, as your counterparts in the airport world, which I know is a shaky comparison,
Yeah.
they're seeing a lower footfall but a higher spend per pax, and is that something that you're expecting in the cruise world? I think Lisa already mentioned that that's already happening. Adrian, is
Yes.
that what you see? Yeah. Okay. And Lisa,
Yes,
did you mention
exactly.
that's already happening in the cruise line business, that you're seeing, although there's a lower guest rate in the store, there's a higher spend per pax?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a very small sample size, as we know, because very few ships have restarted, but we have been pleasantly surprised by the higher onboard spend per guest. And again, it's pent up demand. And in Asia particular, we're certainly seeing that mirroring what's happening on land, which are three things. One, it's a younger customer. Two, there are a few of them that are fewer spending, but the ones that are spending, their basket size is larger. So again, it continues to evolve, but that's what we're seeing so far.
Mm-hmm. And Harding, are you adapting to that change in terms of seeing a higher spend per guest? I keep saying pax on board. Is that something that you're seeing?
Yeah, we haven't got any ships back yet, so we can only go on what other people are telling us. But if you just look at it purely statistically, and if you could draw your dream cruise, you'd say, well, you want short itineraries for ships that don't go anywhere with lots of adults and onboard spend. All of those things exist. So you think, if as an operator, if you can't get, and you've got less people to serve, so you can give each person more time, if you can't on that basis get a much higher, average transaction value for, you're doing a pretty poor job. So I'd be absolutely confident that whether it's 20, 30, 40, 50%, the devil will be in the detail by ship, by itinerary, etc. But, I don't think there's a reason to think, well, we're only going to get half the passengers, so retail will half. It just, the numbers don't work like that.
I see. Okay. We have a question from the audience, and one of our delegates is asking whether our panelists expect a change in demand for different product categories in the future. And this ties into a question that I had regarding, looking to the future, societal trends such as sharing economy, importance placed on sustainability, social media, digitalization, and they're really changing the way that consumers are interacting with retail. Do those tie in together in terms of the different product categories that we might see in future? Adrian, is that something that's one for you?
Yeah, I think so. I think people through this pandemic are really looking at exactly that, how they live, what the priorities are. And certainly there is this huge pent up demand to get back out into the world and take a cruise. We see that in the numbers. I think there'll be more indulgent purchases, which again is why we really want to focus on those luxury items. As Lisa mentioned, beauty, I know that that's very driven in Asia, but we think that also on the US market will be something that would increase. So yeah, absolutely. I think it's going to change.
Okay. And James and Lisa, to at the risk of making you repeat yourself on that question, because I know you have mentioned that before. So if you have anything to add on that angle, do let me know.
Lisa, would you like to go first before I?
Certainly don't want to be redundant, but just agree that all those things, that we've all got to be thoughtful about that from a consumer perspective. I've talked about the sustainability. I also think one thing we didn't talk about that we have seen a lot, especially within a lot of the LVMH research we've had, is brands with a cause, in particular in North America with what's gone on with, a number of the challenges and things like that. I do see having to be mindful about introducing new brands that have done a good job, and being socially responsible. So it's always been important. It just seems, again, I go back to the theme that all of these things are being accelerated.
Absolutely. Okay.
Yeah, I think there's more different, different ways of engaging people, different ideas around things that Peter in the research talked about. When people buy on the cruise, was it the beginning, the middle, and the end? Actually, the biggest single determinator about when people buy on a cruise is when the sea days are, because if you're in a port, the shop's closed for most of the time. So the shape of the cruise and the itinerary is the biggest single determinator, and then from that, the kind of categories. As you have longer cruises, you can engage with people more deeply, and therefore the average basket tends to go up. Shorter cruises, people do their shopping in a quick period of time, but the longer it goes on. So I think if you talk to the jewelers, they love the kind of 10, 11 plus day cruises. There's a big unknown about the restart, other than they're likely to be shorter and generally kind of going to nowhere at the beginning, and therefore to sell very high value items when you have people for a really limited period of time, that's a tall order. So we're definitely not thinking we'll try and manipulate it and just sell fewer high price things. Actually get the 60% penetration to 70 or 80, get the frequency from 3 to 4. I think there's still all the normal levers you would have about retail are there to be pulled. Make sure you've got the right product and range appropriate to where those guests are going to be, not just sitting there with the same tired old merchandise. Change it quickly, make it appropriate. But yeah, fundamentally different categories, no. Different ways of selling, yes. Different ways of engaging, definitely yes.
Right, okay. Obviously, I want to give our audience the opportunity to ask their questions, and so I'm going to jump to one of the questions from one of the delegates who has a interesting question regarding sales targets. How would you adjust the next year's sales target, given that comparing it to last year's and this year's sales has a stark difference? So we're really looking into the business here. Adrian, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, it's excuse me. We're in the process of finalizing budgets. It's difficult because we still don't yet have confirmed itineraries, and we know that the itinerary, the length of the itinerary, can drive everything. Basically, all we've been able to do is assume the occupancies that in our constant communication with our cruise line partners that we forecast having as the ships go live, and then kind of applying that as a bit of a formula to previous year sales. But again, very complex without having defined itineraries.
Okay. James?
I touched on it a little bit in the last one. We're looking at what's the gross revenue that ship, you would have expected that ship to take. How many passengers have you got? Is it about half? Okay, so how do you get double from the people who are there? So, and we're going to be at the beginning, if it's a ship with 50% occupancy, we're not going to be trying to put on fewer staff and tighter merchandise and limiting things. If anything, we're going to do the opposite. We're going to say, well, here's a real opportunity to fast track all the ideas, all the initiatives. How do we give people better service, more time with them, the right range, and really try and fast track things? So we're not taking, if you like, the kind of defeatist, well, it's half, so it'll be half. And particularly our cruise partners have been consistent in, they are looking for maxing out the gross revenue, and they are absolutely open to give all the support, the tools and the chance to max out on the gross revenue. So I think the past is only useful in terms of the gross revenue you would expect to achieve. But I think forget the historic, spends per passenger or, average baskets you'd expect to get. I think forget all of those, just start from the opposite end and say, well, what do you need to do to really achieve that, and shoot for the stars on it.
Okay. And Lisa, how is Starboard looking at next year's sales targets? And as James mentioned, is there going to be any impact on the sales staff And less passengers, does that mean less personnel expenses and so on?
So I would say two things. One is, it's such a unprecedented way to try to do a budget when, as Adrian said, we don't know where the ships are going, how long they'll be sailing, how many people will be on them. So, when I present the budget to Paris, I'm going to call it our best guess, because it's not only that, but the baselines are irrelevant, because everything that happened pre-COVID, those numbers, in my opinion, they don't hold water, pardon the bad pun. So, a little bit about what James was saying. I expect the guest spend, which is historical been, to be as good as or significantly better that's been in the past for a number of the reasons we've all talked about. I think in terms of staffing on board, we changed our compensation structure right before COVID started so that our associates got a much higher base salary and were less dependent upon their spiffs and incentives. So my biggest concern is that we get the compensation strategy right for our employees, and then to the degree we start to get more concrete data from our cruise lines on where in the world we'll be sailing and for how long and how many people, and then start to firm up budgets. But for right now, I think, at least from my perspective, it's pretty much of a guess based on the day-to-day contact with our cruise partners on what we think is going to happen. But I've never done a budget like this in my entire life, and I'm old.
Not so much. Okay, so I think we're almost at the end of our panel discussion, and finally, I'd like to just end with a question for all of you that hopefully end on a positive note, or try to end on. James, I heard you say earlier that, and I've heard you say in the past, that if you want to look at COVID as an opportunity, then it's accelerated the need to optimize the retail experience. Do you have any final thoughts on that topic? And then I'll ask our other panelists what, if any, positives they see coming out of the COVID crisis. So to start off, James, any positives that have come out of this crisis? You mentioned the acceleration.
Yeah, data sharing, levels of collaboration that we've seen that we haven't seen before. Adrian's point about, this is a genuinely unique opportunity to stop and pause and look at your business, lift up every, to use the old cliche, lift up every drain, make sure that everything about what you do, every process, every procedure, everything is optimized. And we're not going to try and skimp on the amount of sales staff at the beginning. We really are going to go for, how do we make everything the best it possibly can, and use 2021 as a learning that may have taken 5 or 6 years outside of that. So I think there is a lot to be optimistic about still. I've said it before, I keep saying it. It's the transition to get there that just needs a bit more of everyone holding their nerve and holding steady in a bit of uncertainty. The vaccine and 2 of them should give huge optimism and confidence to all of us, and for the wider travel industry. You saw how the share prices of the cruise lines and of Dufry, clear that we would watch as the industry benchmark, but the level to which they jumped surely gives confidence that the appetite is there, the confidence is there to believe in the future of the wider travel industry. We just need this sort of ongoing painful transition, bit of gentle and delicate management to get there, but yeah.
Thank you, James. Adrian, do you see any positives coming out of the crisis at all?
Yeah, it's been an interesting several months. I would say, from my perspective here at Cruise Services at Dufry, is one of the big positives is I feel that we now, and James touched on this, I feel that we now have, certainly from my perspective, a much closer partnership with the cruise clients. Not that we didn't before, but because there's this sense that we're all in this together, and we're working so closely to make sure that we come back on track and together and aligned. I see that as a big positive in all aspects, and talking about business models, how we're going to operate, and how we're going to continue to keep those partnerships strong. The second thing I see as a huge positive, and Lisa touched on this, it was a nightmare getting our crew home. But I think it's really shown us the dedication of the team members. And The phone calls every day. When can I come back? When are the ships sailing? When can I come back? And so, again,
I'm not sure if we've lost Adrian there again. Okay, no worries. I'm sure Lisa can fill in the gap there and just conclude with any final positives that will come out of the crisis for you, for the industry.
Yeah, and I certainly don't want to be redundant with what James or Adrian said, because I wholeheartedly agree with 100% of what they've said in terms of the positives that we all need to, really focus upon. The one thing that I would call out that I just have been amazed by is the resiliency of our people, both shipboard and shoreside. And, LVMH did a global survey, and I think the way people flipped a switch and started working from home, literally March 16th, we were in the office, March 17th, we've been working from home since then. The productivity, the levels of engagement. We just did a survey, and 40% of our employees said that they feel like the levels of communication, transparency, and support from their manager is better than it was pre-COVID. So we keep trying to find these silver linings and figure out if, those things that we can be doing for our people, because we know that if we do a good job with our people, they'll do a good job taking care of our cruise partners. They'll do a good job taking care of our customers. They'll do a great job taking care of, all of our vendors and retail partners. And so to me, the biggest thing that I've personally come away with was the way our people adapted and the way that they continue to be so engaged. And 96% of them said they're proud to work for the company. And so, to me, that's the thing that I'm holding on to, that I know that will, make us stronger on the other side of this. And I agree with James wholeheartedly that it's about what happens now, what happens soon, and what happens later. And we're just gonna have to be very agile, because none of us know what those timelines are gonna look like. The last thing I would absolutely say, and it goes back to my earlier point about, being around for a while, having gone through 9/11 and SARS and Zika and Costa, the Concordia, the stock market crash. I'm not saying the pandemic is not a multiplier of those, but in every single time, the cruise industry has been so resilient. And although this is taking much longer than we all thought to restart, I believe once it restarts, it's going to be a hockey stick, because the demand is there. We just need to make sure it's safe and that we're ready to go.
Great, thank you. Such a positive ending there, Lisa. And I agree absolutely that, the crisis does have its silver linings. Normally we'd all be traveling, and our schedules would mean that it'd be very difficult for all of us to get together. But it's great that you guys have been able to spare the time and share your insights and your thoughts with our viewers. And and it's great for us to have the opportunity to speak with you when normally it might not be possible. So thank you again, Lisa, James, and Adrian, of course, as well. Thank you.